Mr. Speaker, I rise to give full support to the bill currently before this Honorable House, the Firearms Amendment Bill 2017. The amendment that was tabled before the House and which had a first reading on the 23rd of May 2017 is a very simple one. It would entail increasing the penalty for a summary offense involving firearms, whether it be in the importation, export, possession, and/or use, from a term of a maximum of 10 years in certain cases to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 20 years. A summary offense, of course, Mr. Speaker, is one that is triable in the magistrate's court. Mr. Speaker, an amendment to this bill has been circulated, and it will be proposed at committee stage that the upper limit should be reduced to 15 years instead of 20 years. And a little later in my presentation, I will give a brief explanation as to why we have sought to do so. Mr. Speaker, the Firearms Act was first enacted in St. Kitts and Nevis in 1967. Act number 23 of 1967. And it came into force in December 1967. There have been some 9 amendments to this act over the years, the last one being in the year 2009, number 21 of 2009, under the last administration. This act regulates firearms in our country. There are very strict rules governing firearms, which all citizens must adhere to. The law requires someone to have a firearm import permit, a firearm export permit, a firearm transshipment permit. One must have a firearms license, a firearms manufacturer's license, or a firearm dealer's license if one wants to make a firearm. But one cannot manufacture any prohibited weapon. Just as importantly, or maybe more even importantly, one needs a license in our country to be in possession of a firearm from the appropriate authority. It is illegal to trade, to make, to have, to use a firearm. And there must, without a license, and there must be stiff penalties if there is any breach for one to have a firearm without without such a permit, without such a license in this country. The Firearms Act is very detailed and extensive. There are numerous restrictions that are intended to closely regulate the possession and use, as well as delivery of firearms. Section 27 of the Act speaks to the type of licenses. I've mentioned some of them: certificates, permits that must be obtained from the appropriate authority if one wants to be involved with firearms. And I mentioned what those are for this Honorable House and for the general public. It says that Section 27, types of licenses, certificates, and permits. Subject to Section 22, and to this part, the appropriate authority may grant the following licenses, certificates, or permits: a firearm import permit, a firearm export permit, a firearm transshipment permit, a firearm manufacturer's license, a firearm dealer's license, a gunsmith license, a firearm disposal permit, a firearm user's license, a firearm user's special permit, a certificate under paragraph J of section 2 of section 20, or a firearm user's employee's certificate. Very clear. Who should be using a firearm in our country? Mr. Speaker, if there are any breaches in the fact that one has access, one uses, one is found with a firearm in our country, there are penalties. And there must be stiff penalties for such. The Parent Act is arranged in a number of parts, such as, and including, 1, the importation, transportation, and transshipment of firearms. Part 2 or 3 in the Act speaks to manufacture, sale, purchase, and repair of firearms and ammunition. It speaks to possession and use of firearms and ammunition. It also speaks to licenses, certificates, and permits that I've just delineated. The Firearms Act also sets out a framework, regulations governing the power or granting the power of search and to obtain information. It also speaks to financial and miscellaneous provisions and so forth. Mr. Speaker, up to the year 2009, the Firearms Act set out penalties that were not less than 5 years and not more than 10 years in the magistrate's court, and not less than 10 years and not exceeding 20 years in the High Court. These penalties were related to, and I keep repeating them because it's important for people to understand, that guns, firearms are not like bread and butter. They should be restricted. And the use the dealing, the trading in firearms is something of exceptional seriousness in our country. They're not to be played with. And we have heard time and again over the last 2 days the high percentage of people who are being killed with firearms. If you are involved in the importation, exportation, or transshipment of firearms without a certificate, a license, or permit, you are liable in the magistrate's court for penalties, and in the high court for even stiffer penalties. In addition, travelers who come to our country must declare what, if any, firearms they have, and they are governed by very strict restrictions, starting with the customs officer, who must bag them and so forth. There are general restrictions on the manufacture and dealing in firearms. There is restriction upon the acquisition or disposal of firearms. There is restriction on the delivery of firearms. There are special restrictions on holders, on manufacturing or dealers' licenses. There are those relating to gunsmiths. If there are people who want to shorten firearms for easier concealment and so forth, and are converting imitation firearms into real firearms, there are restrictions on this, and these constitute offenses that can be sanctioned in the magistrate's court and in the high court. And of course, possession. If you have a firearm and you do not have the legal authority from the appropriate authority, you're committing an offense in our country. And you're liable on conviction in the magistrate's court or the high court with a term in prison. There's general restriction for the carrying of a firearm in public. And there are special restrictions for those who carry in public. And of course, if there are any breaches of these, again, you are liable on conviction to stiff penalties and so forth. In the year 2009, the Firearms Act was further amended, number 21 of 2009, as I mentioned earlier, to establish that these penalties would now be not exceeding 10 years in the magistrate's court and not exceeding 20 years in the high court. And an important point to recognize, Mr. Speaker, because these amendments responded to a ruling, the ruling of our Court of Appeal in the Eastern Caribbean, that a mandatory minimum sentence was unconstitutional because it restricted the discretion of the judicial officer. The law does not say what your minimum sentence should be, because it removes the discretion of a judicial officer to establish within all the circumstances presented before them, that discretion to sentence. So, I should also point out that this was also in relation to where a firearm was used with intent to injure. Because at the High Court, on indictment, the old law had suggested that a minimum sentence, once somebody had been convicted, should have been not less than 14 years. And the amendment in 2009 now says that the judge, the court, has the discretion to sentence someone with the use of a firearm that can injure, that can damage somebody, with life imprisonment, up to life imprisonment. It gives the judge, the court, the flexibility, the discretion to sentence someone for up to life imprisonment. Mr. Speaker, since 2009, and even before, we have been, and we continue to be, plagued by the incidents of violent crime in our country. Violent crimes committed by firearms. Members of this Honorable House have made extensive presentations over the past couple days on this matter, and the public, our communities, the people listening, must understand, and those who do not, up to now, that it is a central issue in our country. It is a very serious issue. It is not to be taken serious, less than any serious manner. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that members on both sides of the aisle will give unanimous support for what we are doing here today, over the past 2 days, 3 days. Our people are traumatized. Our communities in St. Kitts and Nevis are deeply concerned. And this government is responding with a number of measures on a multi-tiered front, with a multi-pronged approach to combat the scourge of gun violence that threatens to engulf us here. I want to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that this bill, which we hope, again, will get the unanimous support of the Parliament, is just one step in building out the criminal justice system, the administration of justice, in the fight against crime. One which, as small as it is, has the support of all well-meaning people in our country. I must emphasize that, Mr. Speaker, because we have heard some members say that this bill, increasing penalties, cannot stop gun violence. We are not saying that. We are saying it's one step, one part, one cog in a broad system. This is not the only thing that is being done or will be done. It is one step that we bring now. Gun violence is prevalent in our society. Illegal arms are finding a way into our communities, and they're being used for violent crimes, and worse, They have been used predominantly in the commission of homicides. In some cases, we have been hearing the statistics. 80–90% of homicides are being committed with firearms. And so, when we come to this Honorable House to deal with this bill, it is directed at a scourge, it is directed at a cancer that's infecting our community. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis, this Team Unity administration is determined to take all necessary steps to protect and to continue to protect the people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis as we combat crime. And again, Mr. Speaker, it bears repeating that despite the seeming simplicity of this amendment, the bill has elicited a very robust debate thus far from members on both sides of the aisle, one which the people of our country must welcome. We have heard different views in some cases, but I detect general support against the fight for crime, against crime, and support for the fight against crime. It has given members the opportunity to debate this very deep concern that the people of St. Kitts and Nevis have about crime, and in particular homicides. Whether it is about a young man in St. Paul's, or the double murder, the double homicide in Taylor's Village, young females full of life in Cotton Ground and in Church Ground in Nevis, the entire community in St. Kitts and in Nevis are deeply concerned, and they should be. These incidents of homicides that I refer to, whether it is a Sean Smith of Taylor's, a Dennis Bunup, he's also called One Wing Liebert of Westbourne Gut, or Lydia Pemberton of Church Ground, are tragic incidents. These are some of the most recent. The member for number one has told us, Mr. Speaker, on the first evening of this debate, that since 1995, there have been more than 300 people, most of them young people, in the fullness of life, who have been taken away from us too soon. Mr. Speaker, our system of democracy is one in which the people's representatives respond to their felt needs. Concerns of our citizens are brought to the People's House, the legislature. And it is here we have had different representatives speak to what they are hearing from their constituents, from the people of the country. Yesterday, we were treated to a very passionate and impassioned presentation by the member for number 5, where he had his own personal experience of a gun, a firearm being discharged into his home. He brought props and all. The seat of his vehicle, where his head would be, where a bullet would have entered the headrest. He showed pictures of his couches where he lay down on, where a bullet went into it. It is a traumatic experience for people who have come so close. It's a traumatic period for those of us who hear about it. And so there can be no gainsaying that this debate is bringing front and center to our entire country something that we consider, all of us, to be one of the most important things facing us today. Our duty as a legislature is to make law. And no one on either side has said they're not in favor of a stiffer penalty. I remember first speaker on the opposite side, the opposite senator who is here with us, made the point that he too was in favor of a stiffer penalty. On both sides of the aisle, the people understand that we must do something. And though, as I say, it may seem to be a simple bill, it gives us the opportunity to fully ventilate the concern of all our people as we deal with this very critical matter. I must, Mr. Speaker, though, speak to the broader fight against crime. The bill, contrary to some of the comments, as I mentioned, from the other side, is not the only, nor is it the primary action of our fight against crime. Mr. Speaker, this government has accepted the responsibility to work to protect our people. We heard the member for Nevis 9, our foreign minister, the Honorable Mark Brantley, Deputy Premier of Nevis, make that very clear. Every and each member on this side, on the government benches, we all accept a responsibility to take the lead against crime. We are not shirking that responsibility. We have worked very hard to do so over the past 28 years or so, since we have come to the executive. I can recall many a Saturday, a Sunday, late at night, we meet to discuss this matter. It is something deeply ingrained in all of us, because we know we have to constantly be working to deal with this matter. It ain't just that. We inherit it, but we're not avoiding it. We're going to fight it. There will be some measures that will deal with the immediate, and we want to respond quickly. There are some that will deal with the medium term and have more long-term implications in terms of results. But whatever it is, as I said, we are operating on a multi-tiered front with a multi-pronged approach to combat the incidence of crime and gun violence in our country. Mr. Speaker, it's important to give an overview of some of the measures that we have taken since February 2015 and what we continue to do. Very early, we focused on our security forces, starting with the police. We engaged the Bramshill Policing Academy, a group of experts based in the United Kingdom, to bring many years of policing experience in England and around the world, including the Caribbean, to help to reorganize the Royal St. Kitts and Nevis Police Force. One of those who came here had actually been part of the reorganization in Trinidad, with the Trinidad Police, where they had a widespread outburst in terms of homicides. And he was one of that team who came and worked with our local police. They worked to help develop a 6-point plan of action for the police. But just as importantly, they spent time to consult, to investigate, and to assist us in establishing a reorganizational plan that has been put into action. The police are now organized into 4 distinct directorates that report upwards toward the Commissioner of Police, who is supported as well with a Deputy Commissioner of Police. And we speak to where we have crime, where we deal in terms with a wide range of issues that these 4 directors, assistant commissioners of police, report within a high command. They developed performance evaluation processes. They developed questions in terms of the issue of promotions, in which these now are much more open and transparent. The police have introduced subsequently a program of rewards and recognition which is coming more to the fore. Rewards for good work. We hear of every quarter a commissioner's luncheon where members of the police are selected for outstanding work. They are invited to the luncheon with the High Command, they're given encouragement, and they're rewarded, they're recognized when they do their job well and above and beyond their duty. The police have broadened the scope and have developed capacity building with continuous training programs. And Mr. Speaker, this government has been supportive in providing tools for the police and all our security forces. What else have we done? We have set policy directions. We marshal the resources for the operational arm of the government in security so that they can function effectively. We have provided millions of dollars for training, for equipment to assist in detection and prevention of crime. The police now have a Motorola communication system, which is being introduced as we speak, and which is intended to have the police communicate effectively with mobile units. As we build out this system, we expect that this will allow them to respond to emergencies more quickly. It is a platform that basically allows them to have a wide range of communications, not only in St. Kitts, but in Nevis. They can communicate with police anywhere in St. Kitts and Nevis, and a wider field. I'm advised that on a trip to Montserrat, our Coast Guard cutter was in communication with the same Motorola system. Shortly, every police vehicle will have a GPS in every vehicle in it, and will be able to communicate with the police communications unit anywhere in either island. There's now an integrated communications room that will not only deal with the Motorola system, as I speak of, but just as importantly, as we roll out the CCTV program, that from time to time the general public has been informed, has gone to Shadwell, has gone to Connery, as we go and install our cameras in communities, hotspots and general communities, in the business community and all over, all leading back to a communications room where we have numerous monitors to view what is happening in our communities. And this system is intended to cover the entire island of St. Kitts, the entire island of Nevis, so that these are the tools that we introduce to assist police to their work in the fight against crime. It's not just the increase of penalties. It is not the only tool. It's not the primary tool. It is one of a whole plethora of things that we are doing to make things better. When the member for number 1 speaks to the fact that this year we have budgeted $72 million, it's not by chance. It is for real, tangible things, equipment, vehicles, training. This government is taking this thing very seriously, and we'll do whatever we have to do to ensure the police get what they want, that we put in place things to reduce crime, to fight those who want to break the law. Mr. Speaker, we heard about the detection of crime, and we understand that this is a serious matter too. We can't just look and see, but we have to detect to solve. And so we have provided the police. In 2015, when we came in, we had been planning to put another magistrate's court up at Loza Court where it had been before. The room had been built. But we determined, the police requested, and we thought that it was much more important a priority to put in a dedicated forensic lab there. So at Loza Court, there is a fully equipped forensic lab that we continue to build out. Recently, we have brought an expert from Trinidad to head that lab. And what does that lab have? We have heard before of a comparison microscope purchased for over $300,000 that we can now take a cast, a bullet, expended bullet, and test it to see what weapon it comes from, to match it against homicides that have already been committed. Talking about cold cases, this here will help us to solve cold cases. Because the comparison microscope, when you look at the shells that were taken from the victims, when you look at guns that are found, we can now match them. It is an expensive piece of equipment, but is one that has already begun to bring dividends. Where we have been able to solve, in one instance, one gun that has already committed 4 murders. And I won't speak to the others, because these are ongoing matters. And we are getting convictions from it. It is not just say-so, or just words that are being said. It is a long, arduous task, journey, and we will work constantly to improve on what is happening. Mr. Speaker, this comparison microscope and the information, the evidence we get from it is part of a wider regional effort to be able to compare whether guns here were used elsewhere. Because there is movement of criminals in our region. And we are making sure that we cover all our bases. In addition, the automated fingerprint information system, a dedicated one that now has a database of fingerprints is part of a region-wide system that we have developed with the US, where there's a regional database in Barbados that we compare not only those fingerprints locally, but elsewhere to be able to ensure that we cover all our bases. As we speak today, Mr. Speaker, we have ongoing an advanced crime scene management training course right here in St. Kitts, where members of our forensic lab are getting the full benefit of training from experts from overseas. We now know how to do what they call double casting, where we can take accurate replicas of expanded bullets and shell cases to be able to send overseas, that can clone these bullets and send them overseas to be able to get comparison and more information and evidence-based. And it can go on and on and on in terms of the things that the police are doing. But I must speak.
There's a phone that is vibrating loudly for a bit now. Please check your phones. Continue on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. But this is not the only thing that the police are doing. The Honourable Mover of the Bill, the Honourable Prime Minister, will speak to some more of the resources that our government is placing before the community or the security forces, whether it is at the Defence Force headquarters, whether it is to the reconstruction of the Coast Guard headquarters, whether it is in the relaunching of our very critical and important coastal defense in terms of our vessels. We heard about the Ardent. We have heard about, what's the other one? The other vessel. The Stalwart. Very important pieces of our defense that we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to have them brought back online in our fight against crime. And so these are all a plethora of things that this government has been doing. I want to speak, Mr. Speaker, about a couple other things in relation to what we are doing and what we will do as we go forward. The administration of justice, the criminal justice system, is one that is changing as we go forward. There are a lot of things that we have inherited, that we now own, that we must deal with. One of the first things that this government did, led by the Minister of National Security and the Ministry of National Security, because I must give a lot of kudos to the Permanent Secretary there, Mr. Osmond Petty, was to establish the Criminal Justice Strategic Board. This is a board that came into being in December 2015. And it is an intergovernmental board involving critical elements of the criminal justice system. So, the Commissioner of Police, at the highest levels, the Commissioner of Police represents the police force at it. The Commander of the Defense Force represents the Defense Force on this board. The prison keeper, the superintendent of prisons, is on this board. We have the senior magistrate. We have not just those involved actively in the delivery of security or those involved in terms of trials and so forth, but those that people have termed some of the softer elements in the fight against crime. So that the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Esdell, is part of this board. We have as well the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is also part of this board. Here in St. Kitts, as well as the head of the FSRC Nevis, is part of this board. We have the Controller of Customs, Mr. Gerard Bell. We have the Fire Chief is part of this board. We have those involved in juvenile justice. The head of the New Horizons facility, the director of social services responsible for probation and juvenile matters in court are part of this. It is a broad-based body that discusses and relates to matters that happen in the criminal justice system. No longer will we operate in silos, separated apart. The board is intended to have us collaborate better, to work together, to be able to find solutions to these problems that we are finding in our society. And we have had a number of meetings to discuss these things. The intention ultimately is that this body would help to guide policy directions from the cabinet of our country. Some of the things that we have done, I walked here with one note that I had from the permanent secretary in the Ministry of National Security. And this was a note at which we were setting out a meeting in December of 2016. You're invited to an extraordinary and urgent general meeting of the Criminal Justice Strategic Board on Tuesday, 6 December 26 from 9 a.m. to 12 noon at the police training complex. The tentative agenda will be as follows. Presentations by personnel from the UNDP, that's United Nations Development Fund, on the Carib Secure component of the YES project. And if we have time, I'll mention something about that YES program that is being funded primarily by USAID. The Carib Secure component of the project deals with collection and analysis of data on youth crime and the use of such data in decision-making. Recall that the need for statistics was identified earlier on as a major task requirement for the functioning of the CGSB. Under the project, St. Kitts and Nevis is one of 3 countries that will pilot the Carib Secure and other components of the YES program. 2, Dane Hamilton QC will be invited by the Honorable Attorney General Chairman to talk to the CGSB on matters of concern related to prosecuting criminal cases, limitations in evidence, etc. 3, a paper written by Dr. Patrick Martin with analysis of the crime situation in the Federation will be discussed. I shall circulate this paper later. 4, criminal justice issues, example bail, this last December. This is a matter that's ongoing. You recall, Mr. Speaker, that there's a bail amendment bill to be debated in this sitting, and so forth. And I could go on. I have others that indicate the nature of what is discussed by the Criminal Justice Strategic Board. But there are broad developments within this government to work, to understand, to study, to get at the root causes of crime. Not just gun-related crime, but other questions in terms of deviant behavior by young people, youths, and so forth. We are very concerned, Mr. Speaker, of what is happening, and we work assiduously, constantly, to address these matters to help our people in the fight against crime. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, I wanted to raise some other issues, because this idea that this bill that we have before us is the only thing that we are doing to fight crime is a fallacy, and I reject it most strenuously, because in the 2 years that we have been in government, we have seen that we have been able to develop a second high court in the Sir Lee Llewellyn Moore Judicial Complex. Never before have we had 2 high court chambers operating simultaneously in St. Kitts and Nevis. There have been times when Magistrates Court would have had to be suspended so that the Court of Appeal visiting could use one of the chambers downstairs to be able to have the agenda move forward. But today, we can have criminal matters being heard at the same time when we have civil matters being heard. There is a judge here that does criminal matters, not in 3 assizes, 3 times a year, not in January assizes, not in the April-May assizes, the May assizes, not in the September assizes, but we now can present cases to the court 12 months a year, given the load of the judge and done by a court administrator. It is critical, Mr. Speaker, to understand that in so doing, we have relieved His Lordship, the single judge, of having to suspend his assizes on a Friday to do civil matters. And those who go to court on a Friday, when they call for an application for something, whether in divorce or land matter or some other matter on a Friday, in chambers, the same judge who sits Monday to Thursday dealing with a criminal matter has now to change his mind and think about civil matters on a Friday. And on average, he would have done up to 26 matters on a Friday. It's a lot of matters. One individual. Since we have come to office, Mr. Speaker, we have been able to conceive, to design, to find resources and build a second chamber, and to implore and to get positive response from the Chief Justice and Judicial Legal Service Commission, that we now have, for the first time ever in our history, a second judge assigned to the St. Kitts Circuit, along with the judge assigned to the Nevis Circuit. We now have 3 judges in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so we have someone dedicated to do civil matters from Monday to Friday. We have someone dedicated to do criminal matters from Monday to Friday, running side by side, depending on the availability and so forth of the judge's time. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is an important step, but it can't be the full step, because there are other processes that we have to be constantly working on to improve it. It is important to understand that we cannot overstate the issue of what this has happened. What does it mean in what we have to do? One of the big issues in our justice system has been the time for someone to get to trial. whether in the civil court or, more important, in the criminal court. Somebody commits an offense, there should be a speedy trial. There must be a speedy trial. And we have to find a way to put all the systems in place for such a speedy trial. It's important because if somebody has to go to the High Court, you normally have what is called a preliminary inquiry, a PI. That preliminary inquiry can take up to a whole week and longer. A magistrate has to stop doing what they're doing with their other matters to sit to hear this preliminary inquiry. And would you know, even if someone wants to plead guilty, we still have to do the preliminary inquiry. We are just bogged down. And so we have to find ways to improve the efficiency of the administration of justice. It happens in other jurisdictions in our region. And we now have to get on board. It means that we have to look at such things as a paperless committals, so that becomes much more speedy. We have to look at what is called sufficiency hearings, where we can look and say, is there enough of a charge to go forward to a trial without infringing on the rights of the accused? There must be improvements in the efficiency and how we deliver justice. Not just for the person who's accused, but just as importantly for the victims who need to get closure. And so these are some of the things that must be done to improve on the administration of justice. I must say, as I spoke about magistrates being involved in the preliminary inquiries and PIs, that we here in this government is currently in the design stage and preparation of building a third magistrates court chamber at the Salih Llewellyn Moore Judicial Complex. This chamber will allow us to have sit-ins, 3 sit-ins simultaneously at the magistrates court level, so that just as we want at the High Court level to increase the speed, the access to justice by which people have access, that would also happen at the magistrates court level. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a very critical and important step that we are doing. I should add that part of what we are doing in terms of the design and the implementation of this goal is that we understand that part of the justice system must give those who can resolve matters without a full trial, must be given that opportunity. And so we will be creating in this new facility where there will be a chamber dedicated to another magistrate's court. And in our instance, we are thinking of a family court that we will be doing a mediation center as well, dedicated to having us to resolve matters without a full trial. And so, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the things that this government is doing as part of a plethora, a part of a broad group of stuff that we intend to do to constantly improve the efficiency, upgrade our justice system, so that people can have access to justice, people can have a speedy trial, that we can find ways to improve the efficiency of what we do. It is not a quick fix. It is something that we have to do step by step by step. But we understand the hurt in the community, the need for us to be able to respond to our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, before I come to end on the whole matter of what we hear, I want to talk about one other issue, and that has to do with what we have heard, and I mentioned it in passing before, the softer side of the fight against crime. And it has to do with two things. One, we had here last year, and he came to the Criminal Justice Strategic Board, a Dr. Neil Chaitan. Dr. Chaitan is somebody who is deeply involved in social work in Canada. He's Grenadian by birth, but he has worked with a lot of social groups in Canada. And he came to St. Kitts. There are people here who would be aware of his work around the island. He came in, I think it was June, July last year, and our government engaged him to come here to do a much broader program. And from all reports, his work in various communities, in Keyon, in Sandy Point, in Nevis, was met with a measure of success, one which the police themselves have tried to have recommended that the work with disadvantaged youth, the work with different groups. And so overall, we believe that this approach is to be commended. Dr. Chaitan was very much involved in a program that was held under the auspices of the Ministry of National Security. And I must make mention of it, because yesterday it was touched in passing, I would say. And this had to do with the fact that this government, understanding that we cannot do it alone, we have to take leadership, and we have been taking leadership, will call on and have called on various stakeholders in our community. We have met with members of the business community. We have met with members of the Chamber, the Hotel and Tourism Association. We have met with the Christian and evangelical associations. We meet with them to discuss these matters. And we sponsored through the Ministry of National Security what was known on the National Crime Reduction Symposium. This is something that we felt will bring together stakeholders from a broad range of areas. The community will come together to discuss and lend their experiences to form, as it was, a crime fighting strategy. We had always had great, very good relations with a number of institutions. Ross University has taken a lead in much of our work, advice and so forth, and support. Four Seasons Hotel in Nevis, other major institutions, local as well as foreign, have assisted us in many ways and are closely involved. We listen. We invite them, they listen, they come, they ask, and we debate to find out strategies how to deal with them. I want to read very briefly on a note that I've had from the Ministry of National Security on this matter. Crime is a multifaceted phenomenon. Although there is a tendency to blame the police for any spike in criminal activity and to insist that the police take the lead in implementing measures to curb crime, the fact is that anything that the police can do will only likely be for short term. Any lasting plan to reduce and prevent crime must be community-based. It must galvanize the entire society into action. We in the Team Unity government will continue to vigorously provide the police and our security forces with the human, financial, and physical resources, as well as infrastructural needs to effectively fight crime. However, it is recognized that a strong social program involving the home, school, and church, NGOs and non-governmental organizations, as well as community interest groups and private sector involvement is needed if we are going to effectively reduce and prevent crime in the Federation. It cannot be understated. All of us have to be in this thing together. To prevent crime, it is important to have an understanding of its roots. These are complex and interrelated, but can be summarized in three main categories. There can be economic factors, poverty. There can be social environment in which we live, and they also are a reflection of our family structures. When Triton came here and he evolved his theories, his program called EDA, Enforcement, Diagnosis, Education, and Rehabilitation, the acronym EDA, he presented it to a wide range of stakeholders. And the major event during the engagement was this crime reduction symposium that was held at the St. Kitts Marriott Resort on the 9th of February this year, 9th February 2017. This is very current. This major symposium at the Marriott, at which the member for number 6 was in attendance, and the member for number 2, and they both made presentations. They were involved, as were so many of the other stakeholders there. We had about 200 representatives who turned up. It was a very important sign where the entire community had come together to do so, to show their concern. This was not about increasing stiffer penalties. That is important. That is an important thing. But there are broader issues involved. And just like how the leader of the opposition, member for number 6, understood that it was important for him to attend, to participate, and the member for number 2, we say that everyone in our society has to take a different approach. You had people such as school principals, teachers, education officers, guidance counselors, PTA representatives, social workers, youth group reps, and so on, business CEOs. And Mr. Chaitan gave a good description of what he thought it would. At the end, part of the program was for the symposium to split up into different groups, and for those attending to make recommendations as to how they saw us combating crime in our country. And these recommendations have been sensitized by the Ministry of National Security to evolve a strategy. After that meeting on the 9th February, there was a follow-up workshop in Nevis on the 2nd of March. We did not just stop there. It is ongoing. And there is now a national crime reduction and prevention strategy which has been put together not just by a government that is deeply concerned and working to do this, but people across the entire community who recognize that each citizen must also take responsibility for where we are. The strategy is one which we hope will address the various roots of crime. There's now a full build-out of the strategy under the formal coordination of the Ministry of National Security. And it began last week, in the first week of June, and it is ongoing. The National Security Ministry has already met with the Executive Director of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, senior personnel at the Youth Department, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs. Meetings are planned for later this month and early July with the Ministry of Social Development, Representative of Mental Health, Ministry of Health, and the Criminal Justice Strategic Board, and so forth. And, Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand that there is no easy fix. There's no immediate magic wand. There are those things that we can provide in terms of resources for security forces. We can give them the tools. We will build capacity through training. And I want to touch on something that came yesterday, because I heard a member for Nevis 11 mention it. And I thought it was very important that he raised it.
Honourable Member, your time has expired. In fact, we have slipped, we have erred, according to my timing. Yeah, you've gone over already by about 7 minutes. So in that case, you do the maths. And
Mr. Speaker, I would crave your indulgence for my full 30 minutes, but if it is that I can only get 23, I'll take those. And we hope that when we get there, you can make the adjustment, because I'm hoping on you to guide me for my 60 minutes so that I could have adjusted accordingly.
yes, in that case, honourable members, I am going to put the question that the honourable member be allowed to speak for an additional 23 minutes. Those in favour? Those.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has asked for 30 minutes, which is prescribed in the rules. I would want to recommend consideration be given to allotting that which is prescribed when he will manage his time to come within that. That may be easier than the way of 23 minutes.
I hear you, honourable member, but the point is, he has spoken for 67 minutes so far. That's the point. 60. He has gone over by 7 minutes according to my count. So I have erred. We have erred by not indicating it. So the question remains that the honourable member be allowed to speak for 23 minutes. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
I'm grateful
Yes.
to my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the extra time. I think, Mr. Speaker, that I've tried to give a broad view on the various things that our administration, the Steam Union administration, within a 2-year window, 24 months, have done to buttress our criminal justice system. We have introduced a number of new innovations that we believe go a long way in helping to set the platform, the foundation, to build out our systems. We believe that the resources that we have made available for the police, the tools, to get the tools to do their work, whether in detection, forensic lab, vehicles, the surveillance equipment in the CCTV program, the Motorola program, whatever it is, we have not shirked from giving the police the tools that they require. We understand that these things won't have an immediate effect, that there needs to be much more work to be able to claw back some of what has gotten away from us as a society. And we'll continue to work that. I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, some of the other things that we are doing and will continue to do. The Police High Command have come to us and have asked us in the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs to assist them with certain other stuff. And stuff I mean legislation, to assist us in terms of a legal framework, just like how we are here today to speak about making an important amendment to the firearms bill to stiffen penalties, or the penalty at the magistrates' court level in relation to the use, possession, use, trading with firearms. We believe that there are other tools that we need to buttress our fight in crime. We will be bringing on board, introducing updated DNA regulations and how it is used in terms of the detection that our forensic people would need. The member for number 11, I mentioned earlier, had mentioned the question of witness protection. And it is a very, very important aspect of our fight against crime. Because the police, the justice system cannot be as effective as it can be without people who witness a crime, who see a crime, coming forward to give evidence, on oath, so that we can put away the criminals. It is very important. We understand that there is a fear among some that if they were to do so, that they might be personally targeted. And if not they themselves, relatives, their parents, their children, their siblings. And so, we will be working closely with not just our local police, but regional authorities to ensure that a proper system of witness protection is devised and developed across our region and with friendly and cooperating nations elsewhere. We do currently have some arrangements, and we have found that they have been effective. Just this year, we have had people who were overseas. I can't say where, because that's the whole idea of witness protection, who have been able to give evidence on camera, remotely, to be able to secure convictions in our court system. And so this is a program that we have to find every way to develop, to give people the confidence that if there's any threat, any harm intended to witnesses, that there is a system that can and will protect they and their families. The witness protection system will have to be developed properly. There is, as well, Mr. Speaker, another tool that we are currently working on. There has been a Proceeds of Crime bill introduced into the Honorable House some 4 or 5 years ago. It needs revisiting and strengthening. We think is a very good bill, but we need to look at it further. But in addition, we will be speaking about asset recovery in civil matters when it comes to criminal activity. It is going to be a bill that our crime-fighting units feel is critical. We are getting support in this legislation from regional and international institutions. We have both the U.S. Embassy and the British High Command have taken interest in this, as has the RSS. They have been coming and meeting with our Parliamentary Council and drafters to develop and modify the regional model that has already been introduced in jurisdictions such as St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Antigua, and that have brought significant improvements there. This bill is intended to take away the ill-gotten gains of criminals, because we believe if they don't have these funds, they can't buy weapons, they can't buy illicit drugs, that we will take away the wherewithal for them to operate in this criminal environment. And so this is a very critical piece of legislation that we will also be introducing shortly. And it will not be the only and primary thing as we are hearing about this bill. But it will give us a chance, Mr. Speaker, to come again and have members on this side and on that side discuss these issues of crime that are plaguing our society. And so, Mr. Speaker, I need to emphasize that what we are doing here is to make sure that every cog in this criminal justice system, every cog, every particular part in our fight against crime is clearly understood by our people. We have to thank those here who have made contributions on both sides of the aisle. But we want to have everyone, all citizens, engaged in this fight. I just want to speak to one more because it's important. We also have support from a number of international agencies. Just yesterday, I happened to have met with representatives of USAID who are engaged with us in having studies done about the roots of crime and incidences of deviant behavior in our young people, in juveniles, who come into contact with the juvenile justice system. those who are on probation and elsewhere, why is it that they get involved in criminal activity? What are the circumstances, the family background, the environments in which they operate? And we had in November last year and again in January meetings of these donors and others at OTI where we began the process for us to focus and target our youth, this youth empowerment system. And we will and are able to access millions of dollars that have been allocated for us to help to study and to work, to have our young people moved away at an early stage from getting involved in crime and criminal activity. And so we must give our thanks to these international agencies, to the United States government and to the UK and others who give us support that we can stem, as it was, this movement by our young people away from the true and proper path that they should be involved in. Mr. Speaker, we understand in this government. We get it. And we have been responding. We understand that is not just a question of stiffening a penalty for a gun or for guns. We understand that that is critical and important. But we also understand that it involves a multi-pronged approach, a multi-tiered approach. And I hope that in my presentation, I have been able to lay out some of that. I've done a fair bit of it, but there's even more going on. And I want us all to understand that we are working at it. We will continue to work on it for the good of our people, all our people. Crime ain't labor, it ain't unity, it ain't PAM, CCM, or NRP. It affects all of us. I'm sure none of us know how Badap vote or who he is. Huh? We don't know. At least I don't know. Maybe you know. But we have to be our brother's keeper in this matter. Everybody needs to get on board. We got to turn it back. And Mr. Speaker, can't overemphasize the fact that I have been in this honorable house for 7 years. And I must say that this debate has been one of the most intriguing for me. Because we have heard from everybody deep-seated feelings about this matter. Not just about the question of stiffening a penalty, but more importantly, that there is a serious, serious problem in the country about crime. And if I hear right, if I will pull from what I'm hearing, that everybody wants us to fight it and turn it around. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want once more to go back to where we began. This bill is about increasing the penalty at the magistrates court level up to a maximum of 15 years. We are not setting any minimum standard. The court requires that we give a judicial officer the discretion within the facts of a case to determine how you sentence. But we signal that we represent people, and the people of this country feels that the government, the executive, the parliament, the legislature needs to let those who want to be criminal pick up a gun and use it to hurt people, to maim people, to kill people, that we send a message. We need to end this wanton use, this flow of weapons in our country. And this is only one step. We have other things that we will be coming to the Parliament with and introducing for the people to understand. Mr. Speaker, we have looked at other things. We have looked at what they do in Jamaica. I must mention that. Because there, Jamaica had a similar problem way back in the 1970s. Began in the 1970s. Right now, we had some figures here this week. 1 month is what, 650 something murders? And in Jamaica, they went and introduced a gun court. They put to have a gun court, a court just for guns. You find a gun, you use a gun, you go gun court. You go before a magistrate, you go before a judge, you are put in a camp with barbed wire on it. Indefinitely. They catch you with a gun, go gun court, one sentence, indefinite detention. That 3 divisions of that court. A resident magistrate, a panel of 3 resident magistrates, and a judge. There are aspects of the court that were found to be unconstitutional. It went to the Privy Council, and they struck down aspects of it. That case, Hines and others, 1976, is a seminal case for a number of reasons across the justice system in our region and across the whole Commonwealth. It establishes questions of independence of judges, judicial independence. It establishes that there is something called an inferior court and a superior court. That the High Court is recognized as a superior court. That have independence and difference from a magistrate's court as an inferior court. And that there must be some distinction between the two, which would be one of the considerations that we have had to struggle with. While we want to respond to our people, we also understand that you cannot equate a magistrate with a judge. Okay? We understand that. And so we have made a distinction. We have made a distinction in that the judge can give you life imprisonment. And in terms of 20 years in a number of these cases, you're saying. But we have made that distinction by making the magistrate a law. It is what you all did. You did it, made that distinction. You increased the things just 8 years ago. We just passed laws. We passed the law. The judicial officer will do what they have to do. We do what we have to do. We won't interfere. We can't interfere. We can't tell a judge what to do. We cannot. That's our system. That is what we inherit. But I make the case, though, to go back to the gun court case, that there have been very draconian issues in other parts of this region. We have watched it and we struggle with it. There have been problems with the gun court, other types of problems with the gun court in Jamaica. Because there's so many people that you have there. While it was thought that it would speed up the process, it has tended to bog it down. And there are people on the docket for more than a year. It has not really increased the efficiency of the system. I raise that for you to understand why it is that while we want to send that very strong response to our people, we understand that there are some considerations that we must bear in mind. We understand that. But we are very clear on this matter. The people of this country are fed up with this incidence of gun crime. And we say that if it is that a whole range of matters that I've delineated earlier, that you breach the Firearms Act, possession, importation, exportation, transshipment. If you want to tamper with a gun and shorten it, whatever it is. If you don't have a license, you don't have a permit, you don't have a certificate, and you are convicted, we say that you will now have, you could be liable to be sent to jail for up to 15 years at the magistrate's court. You can go to the High Court, but there you can get up to 20 years. And if it is that you try to injure somebody, you use it with intent, you are liable up to life imprisonment. And we say that we respond to the people of this country, and we know that each one of you on that side, as well as everybody on this side, will support us, because you represent the people out there. And this is what the people want. We expect that everybody will do their duty, Mr. Speaker, and give full and safe passage to this piece of legislation that's currently before the House. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Stay up to date with news, programs, and activities of the government with SKNIS. Like us on Facebook. Listen to us on SoundCloud. Follow us on Twitter. And watch our videos on YouTube. Connect with us today. SKNIS, St. Kitts and Nevis Information Service.